Hi there. Harley and I, say hello Harley, have been talking about taxes. He's a very well-read dog. Not about whether taxes are too high or too low, or whether or not they are unfairly burdening the poor or the wealthy, which is what most debates online seem to be about taxes these days. But more to do with why the UK tax code is such a mess. Why is it so complex, and just how much damage is that doing to the UK? So essentially, the UK tax code is one of the longest in the world, just in terms of the number of pages in it. It is not the most complex. For the most complex, you'd have to visit places like Italy or Japan. But ours isn't far behind. And most tax codes around the world are simpler, more transparent, clearer, and less distorting. So what kind of damage does our tax code do to our country? How did we get here? And what exactly are the issues? Well, let's start with how we got here. If you go back to the 1950s, taxes in the UK were high, but the tax code wasn't that complex. We were pretty much average for an industrial nation. And it continued that way into the 60s and the 70s. And then in the dying years of the Labour government into the Thatcher government, so the late 70s, early 80s, the tax burden as a proportion of the economy started to fall, but the tax code got complex. We decided to stop subsidising industry. Indeed, we denationalised a lot of it, but we started to create all sorts of tax incentives to encourage investment into certain areas of the economy. We created all sorts of loopholes, unintentionally in most cases, and that triggered the start of what you could only be described as an arms race between HMRC and tax accountants. Then into the late 90s and early 2000s, so that's the end of the major government and the Blair years, we created even more incentives, we created more cliff edges, withdrew tapering of certain taxes, and that made the tax code much more complex. We had the Big Bang in the City, which brought in a whole bunch of financial taxes that didn't exist before. Then as we reached the end of the Labour years with Gordon Brown and the beginning of the Cameron years, we started seeing taxes used for social policies. So things like child tax credits and other areas such as R&D credits and so on. And we saw even more tax avoidance schemes, even more complexity, and that arms race between HMRC and the tax accountants was at its height. Then over the last, say, 10 years, we've seen Chancellor after Chancellor make tweak after tweak to how taxes work. That's something that Chancellors have always done, but it's taken on a huge life of its own now. So you see things like freezing of personal allowances, a whole bunch of other stealth taxes, as Chancellors have looked for ways to raise money without increasing the headline rates of taxes, because they don't want to be seen to be putting a burden on ordinary working people. And now we've got a situation where taxes, which have always been distortionary, but now are even more so, and the economic cost to the country, economists all agree there is one, whether they're left or the right, stands between 20 to 40 billion pounds, depending on how you do the maths. Personally, I think the number's much bigger than that, because it fails to take into account the change of culture that would come with having to remove compliance and get rid of the people in terms of the jobs they do, not actually killing them or anything, that are having to do these jobs and them having to do something else that may be more entrepreneurial and actually contribute to the economy. So what are the issues with our tax code specifically? Well, one of the biggest ones are cliff edges. If you think about your personal income tax, you pay nothing until you fill your personal allowance, and then suddenly 20% tax on everything thereafter until you hit around 50,000, then another big jump to 40,000, and then you get to 100,000 and a smaller jump to 45, but you also start to lose your personal allowance over the next 25,000. And then it goes back down again. So we have this bizarre situation where somebody on, say, £110,000 is paying a higher incremental tax rate than someone on £130,000. And which is just weird if you believe in progressive taxes. On things like VAT, if you are running a small business, maybe you are a tradesman, you're a plumber, you're an electrician, whatever, you don't have to charge VAT on anything until you reach the VAT threshold. And then suddenly you've got to charge 20% on everything. So you've gone from being competitive to being uncompetitive. And your mate down the road who does a little less business can undercut you by 20%. So surprise, surprise, if you look at the data from HMRC and the number of small companies and sole traders who miraculously earn just below the VAT threshold, that's because they either go on holiday for the last couple of months of the year, or they do all sorts of tricks to avoid going over the threshold. They get their customers to order materials directly, so they don't go through the company, or they do cash in hand work as part of the grey economy. But either way, they avoid growing their businesses because they don't want to start paying VAT, and that does massive damage. Speaking of VAT, if you look at the number of exemptions to where VAT is applied and the changes in rates, they are incredibly complex, the most complex in the world. Other nations, irrespective of whether they are left-wing or right-wing, have much simpler VAT codes. You only have to look at the rather silly story from a few years ago where McVitie's were in court and them and HMRC were arguing whether a Jaffa cake was a biscuit or a cake. Because in one case, it's liable to VAT, and in the other, it isn't. If you look into investment decisions, people are not making decisions on where to invest their money based on the best return in terms of where their money will do best because that's the product or the business that's performing best. They make decisions on where their money will get them the best tax efficient return. And that's decided by government deciding this industry needs support or that industry needs support. And governments are lousy at making those kind of economic decisions. Not because they can't make good decisions, but they're so slow to react. By the time they realised that a particular industry either doesn't need support or shouldn't have support because the UK is no longer a good place for doing it, we've been pumping money in for years we shouldn't have done. The markets are much better and much quicker to react. So the best thing governments could do should get rid of those reliefs and just let the market decide. But no, we have all these loopholes, these incentives, and they cause a massive drag. And then there's the sheer complexity of everything. You need lots and lots of employees who understand the tax code in order to make sure you don't fall afoul of it, and also to make sure you can limit your taxes you pay under it. None of which adds value to the economy. It's just a cost burden. One quick thing, Harley here, say hello Harley, has a quick request. Would you mind hitting the like button and maybe subscribing? Most people who watch these videos don't, and it really, really helps. Okay, that's it, back to the video. To be clear, this isn't a left or right thing. It's not a high tax, low tax thing. You can have simple taxes and high rates, and you can have complex taxes and low rates. This is about making sure that we're not doing any self-harm by having a tax code which is unnecessarily complex. Does away with, for instance, the arms race between tax accountants and HMRC. And all in all, you're going to be much more efficient in your use of resources, both as a nation, as investors, as companies, and as a government. The other area that it affects badly is inward investment and foreign investment into the UK, because there's a discount applied. If your tax code is complex, particularly when it comes to capital returns, and if it's constantly being tweaked by a chancellor looking for a way to get a few billion here and a few billion there, they will demand a higher return for any given level of investment. And that means that your country will attract less money. So why isn't anybody doing anything about this? If you ask any economist, and frankly any politician with a reading age above about 12, they'll tell you that they know our tax system is too complex. They'll tell you they know it should be simpler. Everything from the cliff edges in VAT and income tax to the numerous unnecessary loopholes in investments, to the way that the personal allowance is tapered off above 100,000. There's so many things in our tax code they know are distortionary, but they don't change them. And the reasons are simple. The benefits from any simplification of the tax code are diffuse in the economy, but the costs are specific. So if you are operating in a sector that gets various tax reliefs, let's say the creative industries, which get tax reliefs in the UK, and those are withdrawn, they will scream at you that you're destroying the creative industries in the UK. If you were to change the VAT rules so that they taper in smoothly, there's no sudden cliff edge, that will mean probably that smaller businesses, which would never have reached the current cliff edge of around £100,000, will suddenly have to account for VAT, and they'll whinge at you. No matter what changes you make, there will be a loser, and politicians hate creating losers. And if you were to do it properly and make the whole thing simple, there will be losers all over the place, and some of those losers, because we've had these distortions for so long, those costs are going to be hard. And chancellors and politicians are terrified of annoying the population at large, even if the benefit is there for all to see. So what exactly does the right tax system look like? Well, that's the topic for the next video. Ta-da.